of our large national debt, is it reasonable to commit 0.7% of GDP to overseas aid?
Let's turn to former Junior Minister in International Development, Ivan Lewis.
I think I understand the reason for the question, and I'll give you a straight answer. First of all, people in this audience are citizens of Yorkshire, they're citizens of England, they're citizens of Great Britain, but we are all citizens of the world. And when you, as I have done, have visited refugee camps, schools in rural areas in Africa, and you've seen kids getting access to education for the first time, you've visited hospitals where mothers' lives have been saved who would have died in childbirth previously, where kids who would have died within 48 hours, their lives have been saved. When you've seen people with HIV and AIDS being kept alive as a result of the aid that taxpayers in this country through their government has made available, I have to say to you, sir, you would understand why it matters. And the second point is a very hard-headed point. If you look at the causes of some of the terrorism that threatens us most of all, from different parts of the world, it's because poverty and inequality is the breeding ground of a lot of that terrorism and a lot of that violence. And therefore, I do believe, despite the difficult financial choices the country has to make, it is entirely wrong, if we want to continue to be a country which has some social justice and morality at its core, it is entirely right that we continue to spend we aim to spend 0.7% on this issue. And can I also say,
briefly, please,
the way that you bring stability to countries like Afghanistan, for example, is a combination of security, of better government, but it's also about economic and social development and getting rid of poverty. So in the end, this is about our security as much as it is about doing the right thing. And I'm proud of what Britain does in this area.
Thank you for that. Peter Oborne, the question, in view of our large national debt, is it reasonable to commit 0.7% of GDP to overseas aid?
Yes, I think we all should be very thankful to Mr. Hall for asking this question, because it's a question which is never asked at Westminster. There's a conspiracy of silence between all three of our major political parties on the subject of aid. It is just assumed to be virtuous. In many ways, I blame the Labour Party even more than the government on this issue. Harriet Harman, who's the spokesman on this subject, is just inert, because only spending is supposed to be virtuous. I know a bit about international aid. I travel the world a great deal, and I have seen how it gets spent. The inefficiency, the blatant corruption, the way it is used by corrupt politicians ends up in Swiss bank accounts. I'll just give you one example of the Human Rights Watch report into what's going on at the moment in Ethiopia, which has a Maoist regime. It's the biggest single, I think I'm right, aren't I, Alan? The biggest single recipient of British aid, partly through the European Union, pretty well £1 billion a year. It's given straight to the regime. It's a completely corrupt regime. It's a Maoist regime, and there is no attempt by the Department of International Development to monitor how this money is spent. No attempt.
That isn't true.
The Human Rights Watch report was quite clear that it was too dangerous, or they were too scared, or they were too stuck in their offices in Addis Ababa to get out and chase how this money was being spent. As a result of which, as a result of this very courageous 9 months in the field by Human Rights Watch researchers, they showed it was being spent on government propaganda. Now, what we need to have, just to start with, is proper accountability for the money that is being wasted.
Well, let me bring in Alan Duncan. Is that story correct?
I'm not familiar with absolutely everything in Ethiopia. I deal with different parts of the world. But if what Peter Oborne was saying were true, he'd have a case. I don't believe it is.
I
am enormously proud of what this country is doing, and it's not a conspiracy of silence. There is cross-party agreement, because we're doing what we think is good in the world. That does not mean a conspiracy of silence. far from silence and inactivity, what we have done in the last year is had a fundamental review of every single penny we spend. We have looked at every country we spend